Hanging with Higgins, where author and former prosecutor John J. Higgins interviews his intriguing guests about their lives, knowledge, experiences, and projects. Explore, learn, and be entertained. Come, join us now. Good evening and welcome to Hanging with Higgins. I'm your host, John J. Higgins. Tonight I have an author who has written 3 paranormal romance novels, whom I met last fall at a wonderful writers' conference outside Baltimore, Maryland. Her name is Sandra R. Campbell, and her books are titled Butterfly Harvest, Dark Migration, and The Dead Days Journal. Her website is www.sandracampbell.com. That's SandraCampbell. And she can also be found on www.waterfrontwriters.com and on Facebook at Facebook/Butterfly Harvest. Welcome, Sandra. How are you today?
I'm great. Thanks for having me on the show.
It's my pleasure. So why don't you start by telling us a little bit about yourself?
Let's see. Work-wise, I am a part-time author and a full-time tree hugger. They kind of offset each other nicely. As far as everything else, I'm a water girl, so if I'm not writing or at work, I'm boating, I'm paddleboarding, I'm swimming, I'm catching crabs, I'm hanging out at dock bars, you know.
I see. So now how does one become a professional tree hugger?
Well, I work for a paper recycling broker. So we recycle paper from bookbinderies, presses, and make sure that we save the trees and keep things going smoothly.
Wow, what a great thing. I've never talked to anybody who was really involved in that industry. That's pretty interesting.
Yeah.
So do you get like recycled stuff from the recycling programs, or do you have a different?
No, ours is all commercial. We actually were a broker, so we actually don't physically see the material. It ships from point A to point B. We're the middleman.
I see. Well, you see, you've got many talents. So, where did you grow up?
I grew up in Maryland, around Columbia. It's 20 minutes in between D.C. and Baltimore, either way. So, suburban area. And right now I live in Annapolis, right off the Chesapeake Bay. So,
when you were growing up, were you kind of a stay-by-yourself kind of child? Were you gregarious? How did that go?
I was kind of a loner for the most part. I spent most of my time outside. Back in the day, I could go hiking through the woods all day. You know, when Mom was at home, she basically said in or out, and you had to choose where you were going to be for the entire day. You were either in or you were out, and I was out.
That's funny because I think my mother did the same thing. Although there was a constant pressure for out.
Yeah.
The inn was fine for rainy days, but if it was nice out, you were supposed to go out.
That's right.
Yeah. We had woods behind my house as well, and at least when we lived up in the one place, we had a farm later. But the woods are kind of a fascinating place to have your own fantasy adventures.
Exactly, and I was a big daydreamer, so I could entertain myself in the woods for hours.
Right. Now, did you have a neighborhood with a lot of kids, or was it, because rural can be very, it ranges from little neighborhoods to, houses, every few miles apart. I was in a neighborhood. It was a medium-sized neighborhood, but it backed up to a lot of woods. Train tracks went through there, so there was a lot of stuff for kids to get into that they don't get into now these days. Well, that's true. Any is the train dangerous, or I live in a train station. The train that went by here when we bought it, traveled at about 10 miles an hour, and you go up about a quarter of a mile, and we have a train that goes through at 80.
Yeah, you have to watch those commuter trains. They're the fast ones. But we used to play along the train tracks. We used to walk them as a kid. We used to see if we could outrun the train on the train bridge. We were stupid little children, but
that's why they have it.
Yeah, you put the pennies on the train tracks to see if it'll flatten it and stuff like that.
Yes. No, that's very distinctive for people who live along train tracks. It's part of the charm of it, I guess.
Yeah.
I remember back in the 70s, though, they used to use defoliants on the areas. I don't know if that was Agent Orange or not, but it could be pretty nasty. It would knock out any kind of vegetation along the tracks.
Yeah, you know what? I don't recall necessarily anything particular about that, but who's to say it wasn't there, as a kid, so it was just playtime. There was never really, you're right, there was never a lot of vegetation around there, though.
Yeah, well, that was usually the technique that they used, at least out here in Jersey, so, we were kind of one of the polluting capitals of the world, though, back in those days. That's why when people want to get rid of environmental protections, I'm going, oh, you really do not want to do that.
I agree.
You let those companies run rampant, and you'll be cleaning that up for a century.
That's right.
So how long have you been writing?
Let's see. It's been a while. I started getting into writing, of course, in my teen years. I was always writing little stories. I was always one that had vivid dreams, so I would get up and write down my dreams in a journal. But it wasn't until about 7 years ago. Unfortunately, I'm one of those 4% of the adult population that has night terrors. So when my boyfriend, now husband, when we first moved in together, he didn't realize I had this little affliction. So after waking up screaming many times in the middle of the night, or running and doing something weird like turning on a light or trying to have a conversation with him, which he has no idea what the other side is about, he suggested I write some of this stuff down. So, a week later I grabbed a laptop and it all just kind of snowed into my first novel.
Wow. So why don't you explain this night terror thing? It sounds, I mean, I'm going to say it sounds frightening, which is redundant, but...
Well, when I was a kid, I used to sleepwalk. My parents had to put, I don't know if you have children, but my parents, they have those plastic tabs that you can put over door handles, so you have to squeeze them before you can turn them. Are you familiar with that little child protection thing? Well... They had it was really popular apparently in the 70s and 80s. My parents had to put them on all the doors because they would wake up in the middle of the night and find me outside walking around, or, putting shoes in the refrigerator or whatever. And then as I got older, and, if I was ever stressed or worried about something, I would wake up the entire house in the middle of the night just screaming bloody murder. What happens is it's basically just an extreme version of a nightmare, except for the little thing in your brain that's supposed to stop you from moving, for me, gets cut off. So I can actually physically move. So if I think someone's attacking me, I can physically lash out in my sleep, and occasionally my husband has a bruise to prove that. So it's just one of those things, and there's not really much you can do about it. Usually kids outgrow that. But, there's a small percentage of the adult population that carries it, and that's something that I have. And usually it's something like spiders. Spiders are the worst fear that I have, apparently, in my dreams, because I'll have these nightmares that, like, my pillow explodes under my head with, like, thousands of spiders. And I will wake up screaming, and I'll run to the light. Turn on the light in the bedroom. My husband's like, "You're okay, it's okay, there's nothing there." And I will argue with him for about 5 minutes. I go back to sleep. I wake up the next morning, and I don't recall any of it. He's told me the whole thing. So, yeah, so I actually did a little research on it and found out things, interesting thing. People that have nightmares about spiders usually means you're very creative. So hopefully that's a good thing for me.
Well, that's funny, because my youngest sister, she did the same thing. She would do sleepwalking. She didn't scream, but in our house, we were in old Victorian houses. If she made the wrong turn, she would be going down a flight of stairs. But she would actually almost have a conversation with you sometimes.
Really?
And yeah. And she, too, was deathly afraid of spiders. Oh, Lord, she almost killed me the one day. I was on ladders cutting out a wall or something. She was supposed to hold it and stabilize it, and Daddy Longlegger went walking past me. I didn't pay attention to it, and the next thing I know, I wasn't on, like, a normal ladder setup. I had one straight ladder with another straight ladder making a 90-degree thing that you needed to hold the bottom one up. But yeah, no, she would really. You had to kind of keep an eye on her because of that.
Yeah.
I had a strange thing that I still remember to this day. The one night I woke up in the middle of the night and I I was having a dream that a rat was crawling across me, or it was a spider, one of the two.
Uh-huh.
And when I woke up, I still saw it coming.
Yes,
And
that's kind of what happens with night terrors. You're partially awake and you still think that you see the object there. It's it's pretty intense.
I mean, in my case, I felt like I just jerked myself out of sleep too fast. But, sometimes I think we kind of travel in our dreams, so I don't know. So at least some of us. But that's interesting, too, about the spider thing being creative.
Mm-hmm.
There's all kinds of dream interpretations that people have. Definitely interesting. When you started writing when you were a teenager, did you write anything specific?
Everything was horror-based. I love horror. My friends very affectionately refer to me as a monster whore because I just love just the monsters and the darker side of everything is just fascinated me ever since I was a kid. So anything I wrote, and even now what I write, it's all a little dark, a little twisted. Definitely not a reality you want to live in. But that's what I enjoy the most. That's where I get my creative spark.
Uh-huh. And when you say monsters, because, horror films have quite a range in them. There's like the Bela Lugosi Dracula that, you can drive a stake through his heart and quiets him down. And then you get like a Freddy Krueger that, no matter what you do, that creature keeps coming. Both.
I love them both. I adore it all. I think it's very neat. I think it just, whether you have the traditional, the old school, or these new ones that are just impossible to escape, I think they all kind of have a special place in my heart. I just enjoy them. Of course, I can't watch the evening news because it's so horrific. So, as long as it's fiction, I absolutely love it. If it's real life, then I don't want any part of it.
Oh, I do understand that. I mean, a movie you can turn off or whatever.
Right, and it's not real. It's a way of entertaining yourself and getting that little bit of adrenaline rush, that little bit of fear without there being any danger. Real life, it's completely different.
No, that's true. Yeah, one of the reasons I don't watch a lot of crime stuff because I worked on all that. So it's I don't want to feel like I'm still at work. And there's some pretty horrific things that people do to one another. So
yeah,
it's, at least in a movie, like you say, there's at least there's a sense of detachment from it. So now, did you go to school when you did you go to college?
No, actually, I was. I've taken college courses in writing, but it was after the fact. Actually, when I was 19, I did one of the dumbest things I've ever done, and that was I got married. So, and of course, that didn't last very long. And then, of course, that put school off for a long time. But I have since gone back and started basically taking courses in writing and stuff because that's like my newfound passion. So that's what I've been doing, and then everything else is just, self-education, and, I've been at the same job for almost 20 years now, so I can do whatever I want as far as work goes. So, yeah, that's about it for that.
Well, my mother never went to college, and she'd always feel embarrassed about it, and I was like, look, all college is reading a certain set of books in a certain order, and then they give you a piece of paper at the end. If you have an interesting mind and you read a lot and whatever, you do the equivalent of it anyway. I mean, that's so many courses in college are basically meaningless in terms of what you ever do with your life or even what it adds to your life.
Well, yeah, and I was never a very good student. I was always off, half the time I was sitting in class daydreaming about other things anyway. I was never one for paying close attention to school.
Well, a lot of times I think that's partially the fault of the teachers and the curriculum. History to me is one of the most fascinating things, and they have you memorize names and dates. If you told it as though it was a story as it unfolded in these people's lives, which it really was, it's pretty fascinating.
Yes, and I bet they would hold the attention of their students a lot better.
Right. But, when you got to remember that, Columbus crossed the ocean in 1492, it's like, yeah, okay. Kind of misses the rest of the depth of what that whole experience was. That's one of the things I think is a problem in the educational system. And then, of course, they make you take a lot of courses that you'll never use in anything. I mean, I've had calculus and engineering physics. I mean, what am I ever going to do with that? It had little to do with my law background or whatever I ever did. But,
right.
You know. So I also know you're somewhat fascinated with Edgar Allan Poe. He's kind of an interesting character. So why don't you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, I actually found him when I was a kid. I was an animal lover, and I think my father was too. And one day he brought home a crow that he found when he was working. It had fallen from the nest. And we raised this crow. And, of course, I just happened to come across Edgar Allan Poe, the Raven. So I was playing with this crow. We were teaching it how to talk, and he was our buddy. So that first pulled me into Edgar Allan Poe, having seen that poem and then had the crow. And then, of course, I started reading everything I could of his. It was just that dark literature that was just very riveting, and, you know, he just kind of sucked me in with those really great, creepy stories. And then, of course, the movies that came after were, you know, phenomenal for me. I love those old black and white movies, and yeah, so that probably actually started me getting into it. And then, of course, from Edgar Allan Poe, I dove into deeper, more sadistic writing like Clive Barker, who happens to be one of my absolute favorites.
Oh, okay. Well, it's funny, we've had parallel lives. My brother had a pet crow.
Oh, did he?
Yeah, Patrick.
Oh my gosh.
And he used to fly out of my brother's window, and he would come back and spend the night, and he talked. And
wow.
I don't know whatever happened to Patrick. I have to ask my brother, because of course, I was 7 years older than my brother, so at some point, I'm off to college and off on my own.
Wow.
But yeah, they're very, very smart birds.
Oh, absolutely. They're super intelligent. We actually had to give her up. We didn't realize it was a she until much later. Her name was Big Fellow. But we had to give her up at one point because she was just getting too big, because they have a very large wingspan. And we wanted her to be able to fly. And my father found a woman that lived in the country that had a huge flight cage. And the last we heard of Big Fellow, she would dive down whenever she was having a barbecue, grab a piece of meat off the barbecue, go up in the tree and scream, "Help."
Hey, well, she certainly had the routine.
Yeah, she was great. And when we had her, she could say 3 words, which was hello, shut up, and Carol, which was my older sister who was always getting into trouble. So that was her vocabulary when we were growing up.
Wow. Well, yeah, I always liked the poem, too, with the Raven. I thought that had a cadence to it that still, I'm not much of a poetry person because it's got to have that rhyme and that cadence to it. When it's these half phrases and half sentences that I don't know what we're talking about.
Yeah, I'm not big on poetry either, but for some reason that one clicked.
Right. And when I was in 5th grade, we had this really great English teacher for the long lunch period, and he would bring in actually vinyl records back in the day of Edgar Allan Poe stories. And I remember hearing, I think it was The Telltale Heart, because it had the heart beating in the background. And then the Cask of Amontillado or something along those lines. And I just kept having visions of Edgar Allan Poe being deathly afraid they were going to bury him alive. But back in, what was that, the 1830s or so, that did happen.
Yes. Yeah, people were buried alive. And I think they used to put the bell. There was a string and a bell so that if the bell started ringing, they would dig up the body, something to that effect. If I recall, they used to do, that used to be their, I guess.
Their safety.
Yeah, their little safety bell.
But I mean, that would be very frightening. And it's, just, that seemed to have been kind of a theme for him from what I recall. And then there was I don't know whether that was true or not, because, of course, when I was growing up, it was a big debate about drugs and whatever that was going on in society. Well, it still goes on, but I guess that was, the groundbreaking times where they were talking that he was addicted to opium, I believe.
Right. Yeah, I've heard, because he was a Baltimorean for a while, and he died here on the streets. But they thought he was definitely an addict. He was, drank a lot. And there were rumors of the opium, which is, I guess opium is now like the heroin or something nowadays, like it's made into it or whatever.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, he was definitely a troubled man.
Well, the other fascinating thing was around that time they had this substance called laudanum. And laudanum was actually opium suspended in alcohol.
Oh.
Yeah, it was, an elixir.
Okay.
And they used that as, back in those days, I mean, they didn't think of anything as like a public safety issue. That was just, like a snake oil salesman kind of product. And they had many people addicted to different substances back in the day. So, I mean, at the end of the Civil War, there was a phrase called the soldier's disease, which really was morphine addiction.
Oh.
Because of all the surgeries they did and whatever. And then, that was the only thing they really had. So people got addicted to it really quickly.
I guess so.
And actually the history of even going up later on is that heroin was invented to replace morphine. They originally thought heroin was not as addictive as morphine. And then after that, methadone came out. That was supposedly not as addictive as heroin. So,
yeah, I think that all kind of backfired.
Yeah, better living through chemistry, and which in reality, but that's always the fascinating thing to me is how everything ties together in many, interesting ways.
Yeah.
So, have you gone on tours with the Edgar Allan Poe stuff? Because you live close to that.
Actually, you know what? No, I haven't. Every year around Halloween, they open up the house, and for the longest time, I think it was the anniversary of his death, because he was born I know he was born in Boston, but the anniversary of his death in Baltimore, someone always placed a bottle, and it's escaping me, but it was whatever drink that Edgar Allan Poe was supposedly addicted to. They would put a bottle of that on his grave every year, but the guy, it was always in the local newspapers, local reports, but I think it stopped recently, where that bottle has no longer been left on the grave site.
Yeah, the guy probably died. I guess they didn't train the replacement. But those are fascinating stories when those things happen with somebody. I mean, obviously he had an effect on people, many years after his death.
Yeah.
That's one of the great things about writers. You can affect generations to come.
Right.
With your writing.
Exactly. Long after you're gone, someone else is still going to pick it up.
Yeah. And, the human emotions, I mean, it's something that's written well. Just, they tap into it. Shakespeare is fascinating to me.
Mm-hmm.
Once you get through the hurdle of translating the English in your head to understand what he's saying. But it's like all the basic lines and stories come in his plays someplace along the line. Just very fascinating stuff.
I bet it is.
So now, you were journaling your night terrors, and then you started to write. Was there one particular dream that triggered this, or was it a combination of things?
That's a good question. It's probably a combination of things. I was constantly, reading horror, watching horror, and then, of course, dreaming horror. I mean, like when The Walking Dead is on, there is not a Sunday night that I don't dream about zombies. So I think it all kind of came, I would tap into little things that I could remember. My most recent book that I wrote, actually, though, I do recall the exact dream that I had that started the whole story. So I do know I can definitely attribute one of my novels definitely to a dream. The rest are like kind of bits and pieces. And then sometimes when I'm writing a story, I'll actually dream about the characters. I'll dream about dialogue. I have to wake up in the middle of the night and write stuff down because they've actually had a conversation. So, when book ideas attack, they attack in the worst places. You're in bed, you're in the shower, you're in a car traffic jam, or, on the treadmill. You're somewhere else, so.
It's very true. Yeah, no, I the human mind to me is fascinating in terms, particularly the dream state, because I know my dreams are so intricate and they have solutions to real problems that I have in life sometimes, but it can go down a vein that, I would never have thought of normally, and have all the trappings on the sides, the details that if you were writing it as a novel or a movie, that it's a very rich universe. It's not one-dimensional.
Yeah, I think the subconscious mind is an extremely powerful tool for writers. And I think if you can tap into it and you can remember things, and I think it's great. They say when you're writing, the best time to write, well, Ernest Hemingway said the best time to write was when you were drunk, but they also say the best time to write is when you're tired, because you don't pigeonhole yourself. You kind of let yourself go. When you're tired, you're less likely to sit there and self-correct. So you just
right.
go. And I think that helps with dreams, too. They just go. They release the things you're worried about. They solve problems that you're, mulling over. Of course, it shows your fears. But I just think it's an extremely useful tool. If a writer can tap into it, I think they should try.
Oh, that's true. I even had it when I was doing prosecution sometimes, when I had a very complex case, and I could not find a link between A and B. And, I would have a dream that provided me what that link was. And then I'd send detectives to go look, and sure enough, there would be that link. So, I've learned to trust that part of me. For me, writing is I call it meditative.
Yeah.
Because I seem to go into a different zone when I do it. It is so absorbing that I'm really not paying much attention to anything around me, and time disappears. I'll start at 10 in the morning, and it'll be 2, 3 in the morning, and it'll be like, wait, whoa, what happened to the day?
Yeah.
Because as you say, you wrestle with dialogue, you wrestle with scenes, and once I get characters straight in my mind in terms of who they are, they kind of write their own dialogue.
They do.
Which is really, it is such a fascinating thing to do.
Yeah, a lot of people don't, unless you're a writer, you don't understand that sometimes these characters have a mind of their own, and no matter how many times you plot it out, write your outline, the characters can take your story in a totally different direction.
Yeah, exactly. And they demand to go
yes.
there.
Every time you try to...
They will refuse to do the other.
That's right.
But I think that's how great writing really comes, because it's a combination of all those various aspects of our own personalities, our own creative sense of what should be going on, and then there's the emotional level that comes in underneath that makes for more dimension in terms of each of those characters. Sometimes I feel like I talk to them.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, you kind of are. Or they're talking to you.
Right. I had somebody say, "Oh, I know which character you are in your book. My lead one is Archangel Jeremiel," and I go, "Yeah, well, that's true, but I'm also Lucifer, and I'm also the Almighty, and I'm also Lilith, and I'm also Eve, and I'm also Adam." They didn't just pop into my house. But people who don't write on that level, I don't think they really grasp all of that.
Yeah, that's very true.
That was one of the fascinating things at the conference I went to where I met you. I had really, kind of poo-pooed writers' conferences, because I really did believe it would be a bunch of English teachers or professors sitting there ready to critique everything you had ever done.
Right.
And then when I went, it was really so refreshing to me to see other people who struggle with the same things that I struggle with. Because writing is kind of, I'm not saying isolating, because I don't think it's isolating, but it's a very lonely task at times.
Well, yeah, because no one else can write the story that's in your head. So you have to get it out. But that was actually the first conference I ever attended and spoke on panels, was that conference I met you at. And I was nervous, crazy nervous. But that community was incredible. They were fabulous, and I've made great contacts, met you, met some other really interesting people that I've kept in touch with, and it kind of helps give you that outlet for that when you need that writerly talk, when you need to talk to someone else about writing. They're out there, and, so I can't wait to go back again and meet some more great people.
Right. So I've become a convert. So there's a group I'm in that basically says that I'll think of it. It's floating in my head, but it's putting things down before you've really investigated them.
Right.
And it's every time I haven't done that, I learn another lesson that. Don't condemn something until you've experienced it, because it may really have something, worthwhile, for you. So now, when did you write your first book?
I started my first book around 2008, and I published it in 2011, and that was a very big learning curve for me. I learned a whole lot, all the do's and don'ts of writing and publishing, because I did it all it was an experiment. I wanted to be able to say, I wrote the book, I finished the book, I published the book. I wanted to have, everything done. I wanted to accomplish it. Once I set my mind to something, I want to make sure it's done. So it was a little project, and then, of course, I became completely addicted, and now I'm writing. I'm always writing. Everything I'm writing, and then I'm putting stuff out, and I have a website now with fiction, and I have, I have everything going everywhere at once.
Uh-huh. Well, today, it's just not writing a book any longer. It is, you've almost got to be your own marketer, and you have a publishing company. You've got to do the PR, and then you've got to show up. You've got to be the actor on the stage,
Which usually isn't good for writers. They're not usually that, want to be in the public eye. They usually want to sit back and, sit at their little desk and write their little stories and then have people read it, and that's about as far as they want to go. But, yeah, it's a new age, and you have to kind of do it all now.
Yeah. Well, we are pretty much into sound bites and all of those sorts of things in life, and, we've got somebody said about writing or promoting their book, it was like screaming in the middle of a hurricane. And
they are right.
and they are right, because there is just so much that's out there, which I think is really a good thing. But, years ago it was all confined by publishers in New York that would decide that this book was the book, as opposed to, the tens of thousands they turned down. And still, I think more often than not, the story would be, everybody turned down this book, and then that's the book that became the billion-dollar seller, or whatever the dollar amount was in the day. And I don't think there's any formula of what reverberates with people.
I think a lot of it's timing. If you have a great story and it gets in the right hands, you're going to do great. But you can still have a great story and not have a single person read it. I just think it's kind of a flip of a coin, luck of the draw kind of thing. I know so many people that have had great success just from being at the right place at the right time, and that's how they're discovered. And then we have these people out there that are incredible writers. They're turned down by every agent, every publisher, but their work is phenomenal, and a very small group of people get to see that.
So we were talking about I guess some of what's going on in publishing. So what was your experience about getting your book published? You self-published, or did you get a publisher at some point?
Well, the first book, I did the whole route of querying and, tracking down agents that, I thought were a good fit. In the end, I got a couple, full manuscript requests. I got a couple people saying, do this, do that, and then resubmit. And I ended up just saying, you know what, I'm done with this story, and this is where I want it to be. And if I just keep going over it and over it, it's going to become something it's not supposed to be, if that makes any sense.
Absolutely.
So I just decided, you know what, if they don't want it as is, I'm going to take it. And there was plenty of venues at the time. I guess Lulu.com was the popular one at the time, and I think Amazon with the Create Space and Kindle and all that was just starting. So I self-published. It wasn't bad. It wasn't terrible. I did a book signing. I did very little PR. I had no pre-release stuff going on because I didn't really have a Facebook page at the time or Twitter. I've since evolved into that, got a website. And so then, the second book was written. I released that in 2013. That had a much better response. I figured out things like blog tours and, giveaways on Goodreads. And then, of course, the Kindle and doing it digitally and, all that stuff came about. So, and so now I actually prefer to self-publish at this point because the publishing industry is in such turmoil. I mean, it's up and down, it's in and out. I don't even know if the agents and the publishers know what's going to happen next year with the way it's going. So, and then this way, I own the rights to all my stuff. So, if ever I want to do something more with it, I can. I've heard horror stories about writers getting in with small publishers and things going wrong. It takes them a year to get the rights back to their stories. And, that's a drama that I just don't want to deal with. So, yeah, so I found it's easier, and then I have full control. I have full creative control. So if it's a flop, I have only myself to blame, and if it's a success, I get to, take all the kudos for that. So,
right. Yeah. Well, I kind of had the same experience. I went with a small publisher eventually, but I think that they're, once you basically get a name, it starts becoming, unless a major publisher is really going to push you. I mean, you can end up with being, the 50th car on the train, even with, traditional publishers.
True. Yes.
They only have so much of a budget. And, I mean, the Internet is so full of different books and whatever. I don't even know where you advertise and that gets up and out of the clutter. It's really like you have to work on building your own fan base. You
do. You definitely need a fan base to get you going, and you need people out there, sharing your work, sharing your story, putting your information out there. It needs to be coming from more places than just you. So you kind of have to have like your street team out there kind of plugging you here and there.
Right. I've been on Facebook for a long time. I was kind of hidden on Facebook for many years when I was working because that was the last thing you needed. I didn't need any defendant to know where I was living.
Right.
So not particularly a good idea when you're trying to put them in prison.
No.
So, but, I had to change my whole attitude about that sort of thing, and I don't know how many writers groups I am on Facebook, but that isn't even like screaming in a hurricane. That's like whispering in a hurricane because everybody on there is promoting their book, and they're promoting their book to one another.
Right, and that's the wrong venue for writers to be on. You don't want to be with other writers, everybody throwing their book at each other. That's
I sometimes have, some people in my feed that, they're listed 20 times with the same message to all these different groups, and I'm like, you did it yesterday. I don't know what you think changed within 24 hours, but, more power to you, I guess.
Yeah, you got to try to find the fans. You got to try to find your audience, and that comes in, it comes in different places. So I'm hoping I get some good ones this summer because I'm teaching a workshop for Mid-Atlantic Fiction Writers Institute. So I'm teaching a 2-hour workshop on collaborative writing. So I'm hoping that, get some fans out of the people if they attend the class and they enjoy it, that, they'll check out your work. With conferences, making connections and that kind of thing, you always learn a little something. So, and then, of course, you have to get out there in the public. You have to find ways to find the fan base. Sometimes it takes more than just press release or, giving a couple freebies away. You have to kind of get out there and find new and interesting ways to engage the public.
Oh, it's very true. But I think networking is critical in almost any field that you work in.
Oh, absolutely, yes. Yeah.
I was very effective in government only because I knew exactly who did what. The title meant nothing. It was, I need the guy 3 levels down in accounting and human services because he's the guy that will get that thing taken care of. Everybody else, they're just going to, yes you to death.
Right.
So, no, I think that's really an important piece. And I guess with horror, there's probably your own horror kind of conferences in that. I just saw something up here around something about steampunk, I guess, coming up in May or whatever.
Oh, really?
So, yeah. I mean, that's also very fascinating to me because to me it opens up so many worlds that you can tap into these groups that have specific interests that match your
right. own,
and you can all get together at a certain thing and discuss what interests you, and that course you're going to do in collaborative writing sounds pretty fascinating. So why don't you explain exactly what collaborative writing is?
Well, it kind of started for me with I run a critique group for the Maryland Writers Association. So I head that up, and I have this great group of writers where we critique each other's work and talk writer talk and other such nonsense. But a couple of the members and I got together where we were writing like short stories. We started writing an anthology. We started just like bouncing ideas off each other, and we were looking for an outlet because we were all very much we want to keep the rights to our stories, but we still want to be able to have the public read them. So I created a website called waterfrontwriters.com, and we have short, dark, and quirky stories listed up there. We have a web series, and it's just a way, writers like to write, and you're not a writer unless someone's reading it, so it's just a way to get it out there. And going to, there's always those magazines where you can submit small, short stories and stuff like that, but $25 and then they own it, to me it wasn't worth it. So I'd just rather have the readership.
Right. Oh yeah, the magazine. A lot of the magazine stuff always, to me, it's like teaching an adjunct course, at the community college. They pay you $1,500 for a semester, but you got 40 or 50 students you've got to deal with, giving tests to and grading and then giving lectures and boy, I think it'd be easier to work at McDonald's. I mean, they really don't value that time and expertise very much.
Right. So, and then the Mid-Atlantic Fiction Writers Institute contacted my partner and I, my writing partner, and asked if we would like to, participate in their 3-day conference in Hagerstown, Maryland this summer. And so we put a course together, and they liked the course that we put together, so we'll be teaching it on August 8th. So, yeah, and it's just about, how to, increase your effective works to be more efficient, to have, accountability, how to write with another person and, create a bigger, better idea, to use each other's strengths and weaknesses to, create a better story. So hopefully it goes well. Fingers crossed.
Yeah, no, that's kind of a fascinating approach. I had somebody on one of my radio shows that has a website that is along those lines. It's called Literator.
Okay.
And I thought that was pretty fascinating, where people can add to somebody's story and whatever. Of course, the lawyer in me was a little concerned about where the rights were in that, but so I know they were going to adapt something after they spoke to me to make sure that if people were just sending in ideas, that they knew they were giving up the idea, that
right.
It wasn't they were going to have legal grounds to come sue them later that, you took my idea.
Well, people are really weird about that. They're worried about, what protects them with their ideas or their work. So, once you put something out there, it's kind of out there forever.
Right. But, the thing is the copyright, you've got to be the person who affixes it in a permanent form.
Correct.
So people say, "Oh, they stole my idea." Well, they never met you. They never bumped into you. They never even heard of you. And people are entitled to come up with their own deals. It's not or ideas. It's not like patents and that kind of stuff where they get a specific like monopoly on the idea for a while.
Right.
So, But that's the great thing about writing. It's got all those little aspects to it that make you think about what you're doing.
Yes, absolutely.
And I think that it's just a rich kind of thing to be doing. So you're on your third book.
Yes.
Now, these are all standalones?
No, the first two, Butterfly Harvest and Dark Migration, are the first two in a 3-part series. The Dead Days Journal, which is my newest book, which came out March 30th, that one is, there'll be a follow-up book to that one. It's one of a 2-part series. They are separate from each other, though. But they are both a series.
Do you find, I mean, my series is going to have 9 books in total.
Oh,
so, well, that's only because I really mapped out 3 books, but I seem to write more than I think I write. So, and that's I have that story in my head. So it looks like that's the way it's going to have to be paced and dealt with.
Mm-hmm.
I think in some ways for me it would be harder to write a standalone, if that makes any sense.
It makes perfect sense. I get so invested in these characters in the story that I don't want to try to produce a 500-page book. So you chop it into, 2. That's
right.
Kind of how, the Dead Days Journal is one full story, but it's going to be told in 2 books because I just don't want to. I ended it very nicely where you do have a conclusion, and it could be a standalone. You don't have to read the second one. It could just be that, but there is a bigger story that's going to emerge after the first story is told with all the same characters. So,
right.
Yeah.
And I think for me, a lot of it comes from the way I read. I generally select books that are thick,
mm-hmm.
only because I read fast. And by the time, if I read a short book, by the time I'm into the character, I'm done.
Yeah.
And I grew up reading all the Bond novels.
Mm-hmm.
And that was always very exciting to me that I had another one to read after I had read what I had read.
Right.
And, a lot of times with you get invested in this universe and this world where these characters are, and to me they're always an escape. And now all of a sudden that world now is removed. It's like a great TV series that, they cancel.
Right. Now you've got to go search for the next one.
Right. So, and there's a familiarity with it. And if you like somebody's writing style, it's also, like a reward.
Mm-hmm.
Because you know that when you read them, you're going to enjoy what you're reading.
Exactly.
Yeah. I've never been just a popular reader, so just because something's popular doesn't mean that I have much of an interest in it.
I'm the same.
I really didn't like a lot of the books that have been major bestsellers. I don't want to say that because Lord knows I may interview them someday. But
yes, I've actually. Yeah, no, I'm right there with you. I do not read a lot of the bestsellers just because they are bestsellers. I tend to, I like indie films. I like indie books. And indie publishing has come so far and beyond what it used to be. I mean, it used to be riddled with mistakes, and, these people were just writing something and just throwing it out there. I mean, these people are working really hard at their craft, and they're producing good work, and I want to support those writers. The ones that are, I'm sure they work just as hard, but at the same time they have a huge publisher behind them pushing them and getting it out there and telling the public that is what you have to read and that is the best thing out there. And people eat it up. And the little guys off to the side just kind of like, throw me a bone, give me a little something. So I'm throwing them their bones, and I like to support other indie authors.
Well, I think that, like I say, once you have a base, I made friends with somebody who wrote a great astrology kind of system, which is just mind-boggling to me. And I talked to her online, and I was talking about getting agents and that. And she goes, "Why would you ever do that?" She goes, I was traditionally published in the beginning. I got all my rights back, and I control them all, and blah blah blah. And
that's becoming a bigger and bigger trend. All these writers that are were traditionally published, they're finding out that these are people also that have been writing a lot. They have a huge fan base already. They've been getting their rights back and going out on their own and doing better as self-publishing, but they have the huge fan base already because they were previously traditionally published. But more and more, I'm seeing more and more go back and say, why should I give you half and I can have this all? And yeah, it's a tricky kind of thing right now.
Oh. Well, the same thing happened in the music business. They went through, their growing pains with digital music.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you didn't need to have, a record player and a vinyl album any longer. You could just download, and I'm sure it's even harder for them because they would download one song off an album, so they weren't buying a whole album any longer.
Right, yeah.
I mean, how many albums were 13 great songs, there might have been 2 or 3 on there, and then the rest were like kind of fillers. So, and they went through all that. The interesting one I met in my day was that I filmed Frank Zappa years ago, and he had sued every record company. If you wanted Frank Zappa music, you had to come through him, and that was pretty smart. Like in the 80s and the 90s,
yeah,
that he was ahead of the curve on that. So. I mean, it is your work.
Mm-hmm.
So,
and you should have.
If people aren't doing their part in getting your work, out and making money for you, then why are you paying them?
Exactly.
I know. So, do you have any suggestions for new writers in terms of your experience with dealing with social media, like streamlining ways to do it?
Honestly, I'm really kind of still figuring that out myself. With social media, there's so many sites out there that you can get on. I say pick 2, stick to the 2 the best, and just work them as best you can. Because everything's up and down, in and out. If you spread yourself too thin, I think it's just going to end up being more work, and you're never going to be able to put out the quality to get people's attention. But social media is difficult. And again, I'm still kind of figuring it out as I go. I was one of those that was not very much into the Facebook and Twitter and everything else that there is. It took me a while to kind of get there and get my presence known.
It's definitely hard, and it's constantly shifting.
Mm-hmm.
I have a friend who wants to take these courses on all the social media stuff, and I'm going, by the time the course is written and put on there, it's all shifted again.
It's obsolete, yeah. It's on to the next bigger and better thing.
Yeah. I mean, Facebook a year and a half ago was, if you put a posting up or whatever, everybody that you were connected with would see it. Today, you're lucky if,
5 people see it.
1% of them see it.
Yeah. Yeah, that one's getting tricky, the way their algorithms and their little formulas onto who sees what, when, and where is, and they're constantly playing with it, so you never know where your stuff goes. I know a lot of people say, I like your page and I try to follow you and I never see your posts, and it's like, well, that's Facebook for you.
Yeah, and I don't know how to make it better.
Yeah, I can't help you unless you just daily just go click on my page. Just every day, just go click, and there you go. Then you'll see me.
That's probably the best bet. The same thing with taking out ads. I mean, they went to putting ads up, and then there weren't many, and now you put your ad on there. I don't even know who sees what.
Exactly, it's all over the place.
And then on the other end of it is, if you look for something to buy, then you'll get 30 ads for whatever that thing was. Yeah. I was looking for a mouse trap. I saw a mouse upstairs. Regardless of having 4 cats, somebody's asleep at the switch. And within 20 seconds, I had 5 ads on buying a mouse trap. It's really become quite a strange world.
Mm-hmm.
So now, do you do much on Goodreads? That's a site that I've never quite understood.
I do. I've had some success on Goodreads. It's just another. Well, now Amazon owns it, in case anyone didn't know. That used to be separate from Amazon. Now they've bought it out because eventually Amazon will own everything. But it's a good author platform. I know a lot of authors have had a lot of problems with Goodreads. A lot of people will put up a novel and for whatever reason someone tags it 1 star but they've never read it. There's no real control over that.
Right.
People, it's kind of a free way to go. But I've never had a problem, knock on wood. I've had great results. They do giveaways and stuff, which gets you reviews, and you can link everything like to Amazon. So no, I enjoy it. It's just you have your bio, you have your books. People can friend you, they add you. It's a good way to see your novel seen, and then the people that are on Goodreads, they have a huge community. Their friends see your book, and their friends see your book, and it's a way just for more people to see your work, that it's out there and it's accessible.
Right.
So that's kind of why it's a good tool for writers.
I tried to do a chat or something in there the one day, and I was so lost and confused.
Well, I don't get involved with the tech stuff. My stuff's up there. You can see it. You can go to my website, or and then you can buy my books. And that's yeah. I don't get too involved in the communities. I think that gets a little time consuming and a little crazy.
I was at a loss. Like I kind of focus, I guess, more on Twitter and Facebook because I kind of understand how they work. But I keep getting followers on Goodreads, and I don't even appear on there. I mean, I'm like, yeah, thank you, great. We could be friends. No harm in being friends.
You need all the friends.
But in terms of doing anything with it, I'm always just like scratching my head. There's some sites that just seem very non-intuitive to me.
Absolutely, yes.
Maybe I'm just old.
No, I don't think so. I think that's just some sites are just harder to navigate than others. And, you're familiar with what you know, so, you kind of look for the same things that you're used to seeing and they're not there, and that trips you up, and then you have no idea what you're doing.
Right. And then it becomes frustrating trying to do it, and it becomes a time waster rather than something that, you feel like you've accomplished something.
Right. Exactly.
So you're going to be at the conference in Maryland, right, with Austin and them,
yes,
right?
Creatures.
With the Creatures, Creativity, and...
Creatures, Crime, and Creativity.
Right.
Yes.
I never get that. Those 3 C's quite in order.
Yes.
I guess that's going to be in September this year.
Yes, the end of September in Hunt Valley, Baltimore, right outside of Baltimore.
And then you also have your course you're doing in August.
Yes.
And any other things you're doing over the summer, or
you
still writing?
Oh, I'm still writing. I'm trying to keep the waterfront writers up to date with short stories and other such things. I have a Elvis Presley inspired serial killer short that I'm getting ready to release soon.
Cool.
So I'm excited about that because nothing better than being stuck in traffic, listening to Elvis radio, and then one of the lyrics just reminds you serial killer all the way, and then you start writing about this serial killer in Kentucky. It's awesome.
Hey, that's how it works,
that's
right?
That's how it works. And then, of course, I'm finishing up the 3rd book in the Butterfly Harvest series. I'm finishing up the 2nd book in the Dead Days series, and then I have a whole other novel that I have everything kind of written down called The Weeping House that I'm going to start, and that will be a standalone. It'll be my first standalone.
Okay.
That I'm kind of excited about. It doesn't have the monsters and the things that I like to put in it. Usually there's no paranormal in it. It's just people monsters, horrible, nasty people, which are the worst kind of monsters.
So why don't you tell us how people can contact you?
Okay. I have a website, and that is sandrarcampbell.com. So Sandra, SANDRA, and then Campbell, CAMPBELL.com. They can also find me on waterfrontwriters.com. I'm on Facebook under Butterfly Harvest. And on Twitter, I am at dead_sassy on Twitter.
Okay,
and then actually, if you just Google Sandra R. Campbell, you'll find all my stuff on Google. Google puts you everywhere.
Great. Okay, just hold on. I'll be right back with you.
Okay.
For those listening, I want to say thanks to our-truth.com for broadcasting this show. You can also find more information about me and my book series, The Archangel Jeremiel and The War to Conquer Heaven, at www.john-j-higgins.com, and the website for this radio show, which is www.hangingwithhiggins.com. And with that, I will say good night.